Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are attempting something a little bit ambitious.
That might be an understatement.
Yeah, usually we take a book or a concept and we drill down, but today we are looking at a life that it essentially swallowed the first half of the 20th century whole. We are talking about the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
It is a massive topic. When you look at the source material we have in front of us, you really start to realize that you cannot tell the story of the modern world without going through this one man.
That is exactly what struck me. The timeline alone is just, well, it is a lot to wrap your head around. He was born in 1882 and died in 1945.
Right. Think about those bookends for a second. In 1882, you are talking about a world lit by gas lamps. People are getting around on horses.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to send a message, you wrote a letter. But then by 1945, that is the dawn of the atomic age.
Jet engines, radar, all of that.
Exactly. The world fundamentally changed its entire operating system during his lifetime.
And he was not just a passenger for that ride. He was driving the bus for the absolute scariest parts of it.
Precisely. And I think that is our mission for this deep dive. We are not just going to recite dates from the sources. We want to understand the mechanics of how one single human being navigated the two biggest crises of the 20th century back to back.
The Great Depression and World War II.
Right. Most presidents are lucky if they get one defining crisis. He got the two biggest ones in history stacked right on top of each other.
And he did it while battling personal physical challenges that, quite frankly, would have ended the career of almost any other politician. Even today, that would be a career ender.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is the hook for me. That is the contradiction I really want to unpack for you listening. We have this image of FDR, right? The man on the dime.
The champion of the forgotten man.
Exactly. The guy who invented the social safety nets for the poor. You picture him as this grandfatherly figure protecting the vulnerable.
Which is the mythology.
But the sources make it crystal clear that he was not one of them. He was not some scrappy kid from the streets. He was the elite of the elite.
He was a patrician. American royalty, or as close as you can possibly get to it. And that tension between his wealthy background and his populist politics is the engine that drives his entire life.
There is also a really surprising detail in his education that I want to get to. We tend to think of him as this academic giant, but he was actually a law school dropout.
Which is technically true, yes. Though the context provided by our sources makes it even more interesting.
We will definitely get there. But I think we need to start with the physical limitations he overcame. Because reading through the details of his health struggles and the source material, it really reframes everything.
It changes how you view every single decision he made.
So let us go back to the world that created him. Let us look at his origins.
We are starting in Hyde Park, New York, January 30th, 1882.
Now, when the source says Hyde Park and describes his family as wealthy and influential, I feel like we need to calibrate that for you. We are not talking about standard upper middle class wealth here.
No, we are not. This is that classic Hudson Valley squire lifestyle. His father, James Roosevelt, was a business person, sure, but he was really a gentleman of leisure.
And his mother's was Sarah Delano.
Right, and the name Delano carries an immense amount of weight.
In that era, in New York society, it was everything, wasn't it?
It truly was. The Delanos were old money. Being born to James Roosevelt and Sarah Delano meant you were born into a network that basically ran the country. You didn't just have money, you had ultimate access.
The source describes the environment he grew up in as wealthy and influential, but it sounds more like a very comfortable bubble.
It was a very secure bubble. He grew up believing that the world was a safe, orderly place and that he had a rightful spot right at the top of it.
That is fascinating psychology. Usually we think that early hardship builds character. But in his case, looking at the analysis, do you think that extreme privilege gave him the confidence to take massive political risks later on?
That is a brilliant observation. If you grow up knowing that no matter what happens, you have the ultimate safety net of the Roosevelt and Delano fortunes, you might be a lot more willing to experiment.
Right. You just don't fear failure the same way someone living paycheck to paycheck does.
Exactly. But initially, he does not experiment at all. He follows the societal script perfectly.
The educational path listed here is the absolute golden triangle for that social class. Groton School, Harvard College, and Columbia Law School.
Groton is key there. It was a very elite environment. Then he goes to Harvard and graduates in 1903.
With a Bachelor of Arts in History, according to the source.
Yes. But then we get to the curveball, the dropout moment you teased earlier.
Right. In 1904, he enters Columbia Law School. Very prestigious. But the source explicitly says he dropped out.
He never got the degree.
Now, If a politician today dropped out of an Ivy League law school, the attack ads would write themselves. People would say he couldn't cut it.
Or that he ran out of money, which obviously wasn't the case here.
Exactly. But the source gives us the real reason. It says he dropped out because he had already cracked the New York bar exam. Walk us through that.
It is a great glimpse into his personality. Back then, you didn't strictly need the final degree to take the bar exam in New York. If you had completed a certain amount of coursework, you could just go ahead and sit for the test.
So he just studied for the test, took it early, and passed.
He passed it before his law school education was finished, and once he passed, he essentially looked at the degree and said, "Why do I need this piece of paper? I already have the license to practice law."
That is such a fascinating mentality. It is like he beat the game early and didn't stick around to watch the credits.
It shows impatience, definitely. He was not interested in the theory of law.
Yeah.
He wanted to get into the arena and actually do it.
So he leaves Columbia, license in hand, and enters the workforce. And this is where the irony really kicks in for me based on what he does later. His first job was at a Wall Street firm called Carter, Ledyard and Milburn.
A premier white shoe firm.
And the source notes his specialization. He was dealing mainly with corporate law.
Defending corporations and protecting their assets.
This is the guy who later creates the SEC. This is the man who regulates Wall Street within an inch of its life. And he started out working on Wall Street in corporate law.
But don't you think that is exactly why he was so effective at regulating them later?
How so?
If you want to take apart a complex machine, it really helps if you know how it was built. He didn't come at Wall Street regulation like an angry outsider. He came at it as a guy who had literally written those kinds of corporate contracts.
Oh, I see. He knew where the loopholes were because he had been in that exact world.
Exactly. He knew exactly how the system worked from the inside.
While all this early career stuff is happening, his personal life is moving fast too. The source notes he married Eleanor Roosevelt on March 17, 1905.
A crucial detail.
And they went on to have a very large family. The text says they were blessed with 6 children. So by 1910, looking at the timeline, he has the famous name, the Harvard background, the legal career on Wall Street, the wife, and the kids.
The wind is entirely at his back. Up to this point, he has never really faced a major roadblock.
Which makes what happens next so much more dramatic. Let us move to section 2, looking at his political rise and his physical fall.
The political rise starts in 1910. He gets elected to the New York State Senate.
And he didn't stay in that role very long.
No, he used it as a springboard.
Huh.
He quickly takes on a subsequent role as Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Now, the source highlights this specific trajectory, establishing a career that seemed to be moving strictly upward.
It was a very deliberate path. It gave him a massive national profile. Everyone in Washington is looking at this young, athletic, charismatic guy and thinking he is destined for the top.
And then we hit the turning point, 1921.
The source is very blunt about this. It says his career stopped for a while.
That feels like such an understated way to describe a nightmare.
It really is. In 1921, he is diagnosed with polio.
Let us pause on the physical reality here because the source goes into detail. It says he nearly lost the use of his legs for the rest of his life, and that he could only walk a few short steps by himself.
And even using the word walk is generous. He never truly walked again in a natural sense.
He had to use heavy steel braces, right?
Yes, very heavy braces locked at the knees. He would use a cane and rely on the arm of a strong companion to essentially pivot his body forward. It was an incredibly grueling, painful illusion of walking.
And politically, in the 1920s, this diagnosis should have been the end of the road.
It was considered a career death sentence. Appearance and physical vitality were everything in politics.
And the source mentions that his career stopped. He could have just retired to Hyde Park.
He easily could have. He had the wealth to just live comfortably out of the public eye.
But then we have the intervention of Eleanor Roosevelt.
This is a pivotal moment in the source material. It explicitly says Eleanor told her husband not to give up.
This feels like a moment where history just holds its breath.
It truly does. Without her intervention and her constant encouragement, the presidency likely never would have happened. She kept him engaged. She refused to let him just fade away.
It highlights the absolute importance of a support system. She provided the momentum he needed when he was physically stopped.
Exactly.
And the comeback does happen. In 1929, he is elected governor of New York.
And he served 2 terms as governor.
Think about the theme of resilience there, moving from the inability to walk a few short steps to successfully running the entire state of New York.
It to prove to the public, and probably to himself, that his mind and his leadership abilities were completely intact. And frankly, going through that level of personal suffering connected him to people in a way he hadn't been connected before.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, the Great Depression and the 100 Days. Because just as he proves he can lead, the entire country's economy falls apart.
He steps onto the national stage right as the crisis hits its absolute peak.
Let us look at the 1932 election. The source notes the country was in the midst of the Great Depression.
It was a time of complete economic devastation.
And the public sentiment was desperate. The text says people were looking for new ideas, leadership, and hope.
They needed someone to take decisive action.
So he is elected president, and the public is hoping he has the answers. And he does not waste a single second. We immediately get into his strategy for the first 100 days.
This is a massive benchmark. The concept of the first 100 days as a measuring stick for presidents actually started right here with Roosevelt.
The strategy was immediately signing a huge number of new bills into laws. The source gives us a specific stat. He signed 14 new bills into law in the first 100 days alone.
That is an unbelievable legislative sprint. Normally, passing just one major bill can take months or years. He passed 14 in just over 3 months.
And this period specifically became known as Roosevelt's 100 Days.
Yes.
All of these programs together were collectively called the New Deal. The source does a deep dive into specific programs within this New Deal, and I want to walk through them because it shows just how broad his approach was. First up is Social Security.
The text explicitly says this was created to help retirees.
Before this, old age often meant extreme poverty if you didn't have family to support you.
Exactly. Social Security changed the fundamental fabric of American society. It provided a safety net so that people wouldn't face destitution simply because they got old.
Next is the FDIC.
That was created to help secure bank deposits. This was directly addressing the banking crisis.
Because people were literally losing their life savings when banks collapsed.
Right. By securing those deposits, the FDIC restored trust in the banking system almost overnight. People stopped hoarding cash and put it back into the banks.
Then we have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps.
The source defines these as work programs.
Putting unemployed people to work on infrastructure and conservation projects.
Yes, getting people a paycheck and getting the country physically rebuilt at the same time.
And bringing it back to his Wall Street days, he establishes the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission.
Established specifically to regulate the stock market and prevent future collapses in the financial markets.
He also pushed through other measures. The source mentions new power plants, aid for farmers, and laws to improve working conditions.
When you synthesize all of this, you see how these programs covered absolutely all the bases: labor, finance, elderly care, and infrastructure. It was a comprehensive overhaul of the system.
But just as he is wrestling with the depression domestically, the shadow of war starts creeping in. Let us move to Section 4.
Yes, the focus is about to shift dramatically.
We get to the 1940 election, and Roosevelt is elected to a third term.
This is a highly notable moment, breaking the traditional two-term precedent.
The source highlights the tension here between his promise and the reality of the world. World War II has already broken out in Europe.
Right.
And his pledge during the campaign, he promised he would do what he could to keep the United States out of the war.
He knew the American public did not want to send their soldiers into another European conflict, so he made that promise to keep them out.
But then, the reality crashes in on December 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor. Japan bombed the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor.
The source states that after that, Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war.
It forced a massive pivot. He had to completely shift his entire administration from a domestic focus on ending the Depression to a massive global focus on winning a world war.
Which leads us to Section 5, looking at him as commander-in-chief and his global legacy.
He was no longer just dealing with Congress. He was dealing with the Allied powers.
The source mentions his specific collaborators. He had to work closely with Winston Churchill from Great Britain and Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union.
Partnering with two incredibly distinct, powerful world leaders.
The dynamics of that must have been staggering. Tried to keep that specific alliance together to fight Germany and Japan.
It required every ounce of his charm and political skill to manage those relationships.
And what is amazing, and the expert insight here points this out, is that even while fighting this massive two-front war, he was focused on building the future.
Yes, he laid the groundwork for future peace.
By coming up with the concept of the United Nations.
Even amidst the chaos of a global conflict, He was actively planning the infrastructure for the peace that would inevitably follow. He didn't want the world to fall back into war a generation later.
But sadly, we reach his final days before that vision is fully realized.
Yes.
The source tells us he died on April 12, 1945,
In Warm Springs, Georgia.
at the age of 63.
Which is relatively young, but his body had just endured too much.
He died just before the conclusion of the war he'd helped fight. He didn't get to see the final victory or the establishment of the UN.
He carried the country right to the finish line, but couldn't cross it himself.
So as we head to the outro, I want to look at a quote from the source that defines his philosophy. It says, "Happiness lies in the joy of achievement and the thrill of creative effort."
The thrill of creative effort, it perfectly reflects his life.
The joy of achievement easily applies to him overcoming the physical limitations of polio.
And the thrill of creative effort perfectly describes the creation of the New Deal and the United Nations. He creatively, completely reshaped the role of government.
As a final takeaway for you listening, just recap this journey with me. This is a man who went from being a corporate lawyer to a wartime president.
From severe physical paralysis to absolute global leadership.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought that builds on everything we just discussed. Consider that moment back in 1921.
When he was diagnosed.
Right. If FDR had listened to his physical limitations, or if he had listened to those who said he should just retire quietly to the country, rather than listening to his wife's encouragement to keep fighting.
How different would the modern world look today?
Exactly. Without him pushing through that pain, would we have Social Security? Would we have the FDIC protecting our banks?
Would the outcome of World War II have been the same without his specific leadership holding the Allies together?
Would the UN exist? It is incredible to think that so much of the modern world structure rests on the decisions of a man who was told his career was completely over. Something for you to mull over.
It really is.
That is it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.